As someone that has a special place in my childhood memories for Pokemon, the last few months haven't been the most blissful, to say the least. And this video is a returning fan's thoughts on the turmoil that Game Freak has caused for what should have been their greatest release to date. But before we get to that, hello everyone, I'm Verumbra, and if you want to see more honest reviews, gaming shenanigans, and quite possibly me making a fool of myself, then go ahead and hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. And with that, let's get on to the show. Like I said in the intro, Pokemon was a big part of my childhood, but it wasn't a consistent one. And to give you a brief overview, I got into Pokemon via the show, which that led to me trying to get into the card game, which then I realized, oh hey, there's a video game of this. And that led to me getting a Nintendo 64, which the first game on that was Pokemon Stadium, the first one. And wow, that makes me feel old saying that out loud. And that's beside the point. So to continue on, the very next year, I got a Game Boy Color, which on that, my first game was, in fact, I don't even remember which one it was, Pokemon Silver or Pokemon Gold. But either way, I got both of them. And this is actually the weird part because somehow I missed the first generation. But I did go back and actually find one of the original generation games and play through it. And from there, I kept with it, though I did drop off on the Nintendo 64 for reasons. With the handhelds, I continued on to at least Gen 3, and then it kind of died off, which it died off because I kind of moved over to the PlayStation and the Xbox, and I didn't really get any more handhelds. Now you know my origin story as a gamer. Now, that was a long time ago. And to give you the ultra condensed version of the rest of the story, I moved on from the consoles to PC gaming, where I got into modding, which ultimately led me down to the career path of tech and computer science. And in truth, this is completely immaterial to the subject at hand, except to say that at one point, I could have claimed that I was a big Pokemon fan. But in 2019, I have no claim to that. And I realized this. I don't have the same level or kind of emotional investment as many of the people on both sides of this controversy have. I mean, I'm only returning to the Pokemon franchise because late last year, I finally broke down and got a Switch. And I tell ya, the first time I started to play through Breath of the Wild, that nostalgia hit me. The Switch felt a lot like how the Game Boy Advance felt in my hands back then. And you know what? The one thing that came to my mind was that there needs to be a mainline Pokemon game on this, and I gotta get it. And what did I do then? Well, I started to poke around the internet, and it just so happens in a few weeks from that thought, that news started dropping about Sword and Shield, and then E3 came around. And well, before I talk about my reaction to that Nintendo Direct, I'm going to go ahead and give a brief summary of the NationalDex controversy up until the present, for the off chance that someone that's watching this video doesn't know about this, and to give grounding to everything I'm going to be saying from this point on.
There's one thing I'd like to talk about, and it's about the Pokemon Home service that we recently announced. So it will connect with the Pokemon RPGs as well as Pokemon Go to allow players to really gather all of their Pokemon in a single location. And of course it will also work with the Pokemon Sword and Pokemon Shield games.
ただし、ここでこれまでポケモンバンクのサービスをご利用していただいているファンの皆さんにちゃんとお伝えしたいなと思っていることがあります。
But there is one important change from the previous Pokemon Bank service that I want to tell all of its users about.
これまでのポケットモンスターシリーズは例えばサンムーンではアローラ図鑑に含まれていないポケモンも、全種類をポケモンバンクから連れてくることができました。
So in previous games that worked with the Pokemon Bank service, you were able to, for example, in Sun and Moon, bring over any Pokemon even if they weren't in the Alola Pokedex.
つまりですね、ポケモンホームとソードシールドの間を行き来できるポケモンをガラル図鑑に登場するポケモンに絞ることにしました。
And so what that means for Pokemon Sword and Shield is that players will be able to transfer their Pokemon from Pokemon Home only if they appear in the Galar region Pokedex.
This announcement is what started the entire thing. the initial backlash that it got from the fans was so bad that it warranted a direct response from Game Freak, which to my understanding is pretty much unheard of. But the response proved to just be incendiary to the fandom. And this is really not surprising, since the letter from a marketing perspective is really Game Freak doubling down. And since then, everything they do has been put under a microscope and through a shredder. And this has caused a pushback movement to form and divide the community. And at this point, it's devolved to such an extent that no one is willing to listen or talk with one another, and it's destroying the community. My first impressions of the E3 Treehouse event was pretty positive. I was already hyped just to be getting a proper mainline Pokemon game on the Switch instead of a Pokemon Go spin-off game, and that year's E3 was surprisingly fun to watch for me. I normally hate those types of press events, but it was different for me that year, so I was in high spirits. So when they got to showing the wild area off, my head immediately jumped to the Breath of the Wild. It just did. And I thought it was the right direction for them to go. Then they got to the giant Pokemon and how they were replacing the Mega Evolutions and the Z moves. And I was like, okay, we might get the backstory why there's a giant Dragonite in that one episode. Also, I might have made one too many Godzilla jokes during the Max Raid battle portion and possibly ticked my friend off. But then came a peculiar change in tone. Out of nowhere, they were starting talking about Pokemon Home, which I completely missed that announcement, so I wasn't sure what they were talking about for a moment. And then they started talking about how they were restricting what Pokemons that could be moved over to the new games. My first reaction was, so this is the generation that they're gonna lay the gotta catch them all mantra to rest. I mean, back even whenever I was a kid and first played Ruby, I knew it was coming. It was impossible to just keep coming out with new Pokemon and supporting all of that. And the second thing that came to mind while I was following along with them was, how are you going to make up for it? And you know what? I actually believed what they were saying. All of the troubles that the fandom is having right now, all of it is a symptom of a problem I've seen play out in a number of communities. The problem isn't the removal of the National Dex, it's how Game Freak went about doing it. They removed their most iconic USP. The National Dex was the embodiment of the gotta catch them all slogan. That slogan, in my opinion, is one of the greatest USPs ever conceived. Back whenever I was a kid, it was a challenge to me. That challenge grew into an unspoken promise, an unsustainable one, but a promise nonetheless, that represented an archive large enough to contain at least one Pokemon for just about anyone to actually call their favorite. Not only that, but you'll always have a chance to obtain it. That's what that slogan turned into, and that promise is broken with the National Dex gone. And Game Freak has offered nothing but a new promise to do the bare minimum. Now, I know I'm going to have to back that statement up, but if you think I'm just going to use the whole, well, Game Freak is just reusing assets and they're not really putting forth effort to making new higher quality assets, you'll be wrong. What I'm upset with is how the fans have been treated. Before I go on any further, I will say that all the stuff about the higher fidelity and whatnot, that's a bunch of fluff. Cause you're not gonna put DS level graphics on the Switch. Let's be real about that. It's the bare minimum expectation from Game Freak. And if you want to know more of my stance on the whole reuse assets, check out DistantKingdom's YouTube channel. Of all the YouTube channels that I've checked out, he's given the most fair criticism on the subject, and it lines up the most with what I think. I'll also leave a link to a few other channels that are also against the whole BringBackNationalDex, just to be fair. But most of all this is irrelevant because what I'm concerned with is, are these changes a fair trade-off to what is quintessentially Pokemon's nostalgia. And with all things considered, Game Freak has been pretty insensitive to the fandom and it's kind of made a mockery of them because Game Freak hasn't really done anything to answer what core fans have really been wanting for a long time. And that's what's going to kill Pokemon as a game franchise, because Game Freak has violated the trust of the core fans, the fans that stuck with it from the very beginning and built Pokemon up to where it is now. The same people that honestly have more passion for this franchise than anyone else. And the people that are going to know your games way better than any of the devs. These are the people that are hurt most by this decision. And Game Freak is kind of just shoving them off and not really answering them or giving them something of equal value. Now, me, I'm not really affected by the National Dex situation one way or the other. And I kind of like the Dynamax system. I honestly think it's probably the best answer to the Mega Evolution's problems that I've been told about with the whole balance issues. And there's only very few things that I don't like about Sword and Shield that I've seen. And most of them aren't that big. They're really stuff that I just won't be using. But I'm not the one that they should really be pleasing or really listening to. It should be the core fans. Because when you stop listening to the fans and violate that trust for the first time and you don't fix it, you create a chasm between you and your fans that's incredibly hard to bridge. You begin to stop caring about what made the franchise special and start appealing to a wider and wider audience. Then they start to replace the core fans with new ones, and those new fans start to drown out the old garb. But let me tell you something. The hardcore fans are like the canaries of a franchise. Once they start dropping, you know you have a big problem on your hands. Because the next step is that the game starts to try to appeal to everyone, and the game's too shallow for anyone to enjoy. And it always ends up like this. If you don't believe me, look at Bethesda and how they've degraded over time as they try to appeal to more and more people. The Elder Scrolls series and the Fallout series were doing great, but somewhere along the lines, Bethesda stopped listening to the fans and started only caring about making money. And let's see where that's gotten them. Fallout 76. Yeah, that dumpster fire. That entire catastrophe is because Bethesda didn't listen to their fans. They still don't. How about this? The Star Wars franchise. What was one of the first things that Disney did when they got it? They cut the extended lore and decided to make up their own stuff. Can you get any bigger insult to the fandom than that? And I'm talking about the real fandom, the hardcore that basically knows everything about the universe. I mean, they want to say which is suffering from franchise fatigue? Well, I wonder why whenever you ejected all the fans that was going to stand by you. They're not there anymore. And all the fans you brought in to make all that big money, yeah, they're not there for the long term. They're there just to watch a few movies and that's it. And in 50 years, I guarantee you, the Star Wars franchise will be completely forgotten. Now, Pokemon won't just up and crash with Sword and Shield. From what I've seen, it'll be a good game. I don't know about fantastic or terrific, but good. And it'll probably break sales records just because it's on the Switch. And big IPs don't just go away when they die. I want to make that clear that when I say that a game dies, that it doesn't just shut down and disappear. I'm saying that the game becomes a husk of its former self. It becomes a zombie shambling about looking to suck the money out of anyone's pockets that gets wrapped up with it. And I don't want that for Pokemon. I don't want the game that I'm returning to the series with to be the last Golden Age game in the Pokemon franchise. But if the fandom doesn't heal itself and Game Freak doesn't start to seriously innovate their games and stop relying on nostalgia to get them through, then it will happen. With saying all that, I want to ask those fans out there that want to bring back the National Dex, what would be that fair exchange from Game Freak for not being able to use all the Pokemon anymore? Please let me know down in the comments. Because even if they cave and bring back the National Dex for Sword and Shield, which I don't think is even possible at this point, you'll eventually have to ask this question at some point. And I'm genuinely curious what that would be. And you know, if Game Freak decides not to listen to you fans, you have to decide where that line in the sand is and when to walk away. Because you're only going to get yourself hurt in the long run with these franchises if you can't decide that for yourself. And no amount of boycotting will do anything unless the fans can walk away from the franchise for good. Okay, for those that are still listening, thank you. And let me ask that you subscribe and hit that like button and turn on notifications. And share the video if you liked what I had to say, or if you found me intriguing at all. It doesn't cost a thing. Again, I'm planning on doing a Let's Play and a fair, honest review of Sword and Shield when it comes out. And I have no doubt that you won't be able to find it in any of the recommendations or whatnot because YouTube loves to bury new channels. So if you're wondering what my take will be, just keep an eye out. So with that, I'll see you in the next video.